totally up to you. If you're happier where you are, you can also go.
I'm on my second guest. He's got a lot of shit.
Good evening. Welcome everyone to our second guest faculty reading. I love doing and going to readings, but there's this weird thing about them, right? Where the audience usually already knows how to read, and so you don't actually need stuff read to you, and the knowledge of that in the reader's mind means that they are free to do other things in addition to just reading words under the guise of the reading. The first reading that I ever did was at a bar called KGB in New York, and I was opening for a much more famous writer, an Australian guy named Peter Carey, the second person ever to win the Booker Prize twice. And I got up and I read my book, and it was fine. And then he got up and he was very drunk, and I thought, this is not going to go well at all. And he read about half of a sentence and then interrupted himself with a story about writing the sentence. And then he read another part of the sentence, and then that reminded him of some other story, and he told that story. And then he finished the sentence and then told us a story about kind of a mean story about the real person that the sentence had been about. And he did that for 45 minutes. He read like 2 paragraphs out of his book. It was fantastic. And I thought, okay, that is a thing that you can do. And then I read the book and I realized that all of the stories that he told were anecdotes from elsewhere in the book that he'd memorized and just kind of slotted in. And I thought, that's a trick. That's something I can tuck away and make use of later. And so I hope that all of you will be doing the same thing, thinking about the selections that the readers have picked, the stories that they tell around them, the things they do with their voice that you can only do with a microphone. Tuck those things away and use them the next time you read in public. I don't know, say Thursday. That's tomorrow, isn't it? Wow. Speaking of which, the sign-up sheet for the open mic tomorrow is on a cork board right above all the pictures of y'all. So feel free to start signing up. We'll also pass that around tomorrow. Beyond all of that, getting to pick the guest faculty for this conference is one of the great pleasures of working at the Lit House. We want people who are fun to hang out with, people who teach well, but especially we want great artists, right? Those are the brains that we want to be sharing the company of. Our first reader tonight certainly meets that description. Susan Muaddi Darrel's short story collection, A Curious Land, won both the AWP Grace Paley Prize for short fiction and a 2016 American Book Award. She's written several YA biographies and the Farah Rocks chapter book series, the first to feature an Arab American protagonist. She was head writer of the Spotify original podcast, Arabian Nights. In 2018, she was named the USA Artists Ford Fellow, and her debut novel, Behind You is the Sea, was published in January of this year by Harper Via. Writing in the Washington Post, Diana Abu Jabba says that the characters in Behind You is the Sea are, quote, portrayed in all their complicated, charming, aggravating, bewitching glory. It's a good sentence. The brilliant and pun-loving Madison Smart Bell has called Susan's book A New Arabian Days. You see what he did there? Arabian Days. For our time. Brandon Hobson, who zoomed generously into my Native American literature course last year, describes it as a propulsive and beautiful novel, and Publishers Weekly proclaims Muaddi Darraj brilliantly depicts complex characters reckoning with the costs of holding tightly to their principles. All of those reviewers are correct. I've been a fan of Susan's work for a long time now, and Behind You is the Sea shows all of the reasons why. One of the biggest reasons is because of this thing she does with shifting registers to create surprise and joy for the reader, as in the conversation that begins the title chapter of the novel about halfway through. The narrator is just learning that a job she's agreed to do is much farther away than she'd thought, and she says, "When Rima tells me the lady lives in Guildford, I charge her an extra $50. My sister tells me, Haram, she's Palestinian like us. Her parents are down-to-earth people, and God doesn't like cheating. But I answer that she lives in fucking Guildford. God understands." That's such a pro move, creating high-end humor using just italics and contrast of register, and I love it so much. Please help me welcome to the podium Susan Muaddi Darrel.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I appreciate it. And what a great story. I almost wish like I'd gotten drunk before this reading tonight. I could have entertained you more. Thank you so much for having me here. I've really had a lot of fun already the first 2 days of this conference. So it's a great environment and a great vibe and with wonderful people. And I'm just so happy to be here. So I'm going to read one of the chapters of my novel that's told from a character that I struggled to write, and it's something that maybe you should think about doing in your own writing, which is I picked a protagonist who's thoroughly unlikable. He's a despicable person, okay? You know how everyone has like a gross uncle who like has terrible viewpoints about the world, you know, about race, about, you know, maybe he's homophobic or he's racist or he's sexist or he's all the isms. And you're like, oh, what a terrible person. Try to write from that perspective. I mean, not that we don't want to ever make those people sympathetic, but it's a good exercise for you to kind of dive into the mind of somebody that you actually don't like very much, you know. And, you know, fictionalize it, make up motivations, make up backstories, but it's kind of a fun experiment. And that's what I do here. I'm writing from the perspective of a man named Mr. Ammar, and he is a Palestinian immigrant. He came to the States in 1967. He lost a lot, but he also rebuilt his life, and he's done very well for himself. And he's one of those immigrants who, you know, sometimes immigrants who leave war-torn places, when they come to the States and they happen to do well, which most of them don't. Like most people in America, immigrants are not live paycheck to paycheck, right? But sometimes people who come here and actually do very well, they look down on people who haven't done well, right? You know, that kind of attitude. You know that saying that somebody was born on third base, but he thinks he hit a triple? It's that kind of thing. So he came with some advantages that others didn't have, and so he's done well, and he looks down on people who haven't done well. And he's particularly in conflict with his wife's family, the Salamas, who have this family, they have kind of like thrown their daughter out of the family, and he has supported that move on the family's part. So there's this previous conflict with the Salama family. He was very much in support of them, you know, throwing the daughter out of the family. But he's in a bind because his own son has done something that he's very upset about, which is his own son is getting married to a woman who's not Palestinian. And this is for him, this feels like a massive betrayal. So this is a chapter told from his perspective where he's at his son's wedding, and to get through the evening, he's getting progressively drunk. So there's a theme here, actually, see? All right, this actually works. All right, good. Don't drink. All right, Mr. Ammar gets drunk at the wedding. There was a man in the ballroom of the Sheraton wearing a skirt. Mr. Ammar watched the man approach the buffet. He still couldn't believe he was at a wedding where you had to stand in line and fetch your own food. Even worse, such a shameful thing was actually the wedding of his son Ra'ed. Everyone was sick of him saying it, but really, so many things were wrong. A daughter-in-law who couldn't pronounce her new husband's name? His name is Ra'ed, he told the idiot a few times, but she laughed and insisted, oh, I like calling him Ray. It burned him up. Ra'ed meant pioneer, one who blazes a path. That was his son, so smart and capable and clever. He had rejected the family business and left it to his brother. He'd gone into law, and now he made $250,000 a year. Why would she reduce that name when he and Nadia had chosen it so carefully? What else was wrong, Nadia had asked him wearily just this morning as they got dressed. A wedding that cost a year's salary, he'd retorted. A DJ who played American music that sounded like a video game. Most of all, a celebration less than 40 days after they buried his mother. The mass for her soul had not even been said. And here was her grandson dancing a strange dance with his skinny wife, flapping their arms like terrified birds. His new daughter-in-law, who had a white cat she loved so much that it was a guest at the wedding. It sat up on the head table on a white satin pillow, presiding over the party like a princess. And now this man with a red beard and bare legs at his son's wedding, eating pork on a stick. Astaghfirullah. Ra'id didn't care about anyone's opinion, much less his own. He'd worked so hard to put that boy through college, to buy him a nice car, to buy him nice suits for his job interviews, and now that the boy was a man, he did not want his father's advice. What was so bad about having some Arabic music at the wedding, he'd asked his son, in a private moment when the idiot was not around them. Ellen's family is proud of their culture, just like we are, Ra'id had argued. You have to respect that. But we have a culture too, he told Ra'id. Your brother Dimitri, your sister Lemia, they both had Arabic music at their weddings. Why not you? I want to dance at your wedding. That's when his future daughter-in-law walked over and revealed she'd been listening to them the whole time. My aunt is a harpist, and she's playing a special song, she said firmly, her blue eyes staring boldly at Mr. Ammar. It was funny how she broke her own performance of sweetness to get her way in this. Mr. Ammar wasn't stupid. He'd been in America for 30 years. He knew the elusiveness of delicate white women, how they drew Arab boys to them like planets to a fiery star, how they turned their young men into blushing, stammering fools. He saw how Ellen, with her pink nails and her slim wrists, her tiny waist, transformed Ra'id, his football-playing lawyer's son, his second son, a child he'd poured all his energy and love into, the child he'd prayed for. Well, no matter about all that now, because like a witch, she had changed him from a pathfinder into a mule that lowers itself to the ground for its back to be loaded. And while she was controlling him with her glossy smiles, her heavily lined eyes making her look like some kind of elf, she would joke, Ray and I share a culture. We're both Leos. Like it was such a big fucking deal. 1/12 of the world are Leos. Mr. Ammar wanted to shout at her every time she said it. Sorry, Dr. Hall. I apologize for that offensive statement. All around him, people talked lightly and laughed. My mother is dead, he wanted to shout. Stop clinking your glasses. But they continued talking about the tall, dark, handsome groom and the bride who looked like a model. The man in the skirt was back in the buffet line, piling his plate with chicken, steak, pork. So much meat, these Americans, and then they wonder why they're always so tired. Mr. Ammar thought Ra'id should count that guess as 4, not 1. His wife Nadia approached, looking angelic in a silvery blue dress, even though he knew she was still upset. You'll be overdressed, he'd warned her. They'll all be wearing jeans, probably. She didn't care. I'm the mother of the groom, she'd said, and I raised a magnificent son, and I'm going to look as proud as I feel. Are you going to eat? His wife asked, slipping her hand into his as he strolled to the bar and ordered another drink. It felt nice to speak to someone in Arabic. Their other Arab guests fluttered around, chatting politely, but looking as out of place as they probably felt. Of course they did. Nothing was familiar, not the food, not the drinks, not the music. And one of the guests of honor was a cat who garnered more respect than the father of the groom. The dance floor, he'd groaned when he'd walked in and seen it. What kind of Arab wedding had such a tiny dance floor? In an Arab wedding, every inch of the room became a dance floor. You still look angry, his wife warned him quietly. Why aren't you angry? He asked her. You need to eat, she replied, wearing her patient smile. She indulged him a lot, and he was grateful to her. This whole thing, he said, everything's so rushed. They had to marry before Lent, his wife said calmly. You know that. It was bad timing about your mother. By the way, he said, shaking his head, there's a man here wearing a dress. Allah yarhamha, she said. I miss your mother too. They should have waited, he said. It's not even been 40 days. No weddings during Lent. That was the voice she used when she was annoyed with him, and it was his signal to stop. Sometimes he wanted her to drop the serene veil she always wore, to be as angry as he was. The living, he said, used to pause for the dead, out of respect. Let me fix you a plate, she said. You should eat something. How many drinks have you had? I'm not eating, he said. Something caught his attention. Look, there he is. Do you see him? She ignored his question. People are watching you. Do you see what that man is doing, he said. She finally turned and looked. I saw him. He's very nice. His wife is the aunt, the harpist. We haven't met her yet. Why do we have to have their music but not our music, Mr. Ammar asked. Everyone can tell you're not happy, his wife said. I'm not happy. You can see the bride's tits right down the front of her damn dress. I'm scared to stand next to her. Khalas, her voice was firm, so he snapped his mouth shut. She put her arm through his. I'm going to fix you a plate, and then we're going to chat with Ra'id and maybe take some pictures. And then we're going to smile and shake hands with everyone. We will mingle. You will look happy. There's nobody here whose hand I want to shake, he said. Your nephew Marcus came, she said. We should say hello to him. I'm glad he did, even though you wouldn't let me invite his sister. Her own father doesn't talk to her. Why should we invite her? Nadia muttered, Allah give me patience. She dropped his arm and headed towards the buffet line. As he watched her walk away, he noticed Ellen's father approaching, Ra'id's father-in-law. It was too late to escape, so he drained his glass of Grey Goose as the man trudged toward him. His hair was white and stuck out at all angles on his head, and his glasses slipped down his bulbous nose. He looked like a white Husni from the Gawar movies, a man nobody could take seriously, no matter how dressed up he got. I think they need us at the front for more photos, Waleed. Okay, I go get my wife. Just the fathers, I think. He clapped Mr. Ammar on the back and pulled him toward the head table, where Ra'id and Ellen stood. Enjoying yourself? Yes, Mr. Ammar said. It's okay that we had alcohol, right? Yes, of course. He held up his own glass. I told you before, we are Christians, not Muslims. As if to make a point, he beckoned to a waiter, handed over his empty glass, and took a fresh one off the tray. Gotta always ask, you know. This way the culture doesn't become a problem. He was only half listening to Mr. Ammar anyway, waving at other guests. Before they reached the front of the room, the man stopped and waved his hand around. Like some of your guests here, they're wearing headscarves. That's not going to be something Ray surprises my Ellen with, right, in a few years? We are not Muslims. Mr. Ammar's head started to hurt. These are our friends. Right, he said, but our guests, they are not forced to wear, Mr. Ammar tried to explain in his English. He nodded towards Dr. Hamdi, who stood to the side with her husband. That lady right there, she is pediatrician. She run the whole clinic at Bayview. Their daughter is soccer player. She played for a big Maryland team. She wears that thing while she plays? Yes. Some things are okay, some things, you know, I gotta ask. Ellen's father shrugged. This country is changing. You're a hardworking man. You made it big here in the States, but not all the new people coming in are like you know. Mr. Ammar glanced up at his son Ra'id, who stood tall beside his elf wife, and wondered, how could he do this to me? They took the damn picture. The mothers came too. There were more pictures. He drank another glass, but saw his wife's glare and declined the next one. More and more people joined the picture. Ra'id's and Ellen's co-workers, cousins, friends. He wondered who would see this picture in 10 years, 20 years, maybe his grandchildren, in 40 years, maybe his great-grandchildren. He wanted them to see him smiling, but not too broadly. He was going to lose his son. He'd already lost his son. And if his grandchildren grew up feeling lost in the world, unattached to anything, he wanted them to know that even before their birth, he had anticipated this and he had been sad. I wish my grandmother were here, Ra'id told him somberly as they posed for a father-son picture. Oh, his tiny wife said. Ra'id nodded sadly and everyone made a sympathetic sound like a rush of emotion, even though they had been dancing something called a Cupid shuffle a few minutes before. He wished his son had not said that, because now he was sinking into his memory of those final days in hospice when she was gasping for breath. He sat many long hours in that room with her, just the two of them, sheltering from the rest of the world. Over the beeping of her machines, she'd mumbled to him, thinking he was his dead brother, and spoke to him so lovingly in her delirium. I missed you, Michelle. Where have you been? And in his own desperation to comfort her, he lied. He pretended to be Michelle, who could make everyone smile just by walking into a room and who should have been the one to live. And that's why now Mr. Ammar could not stop himself from replying to his son, "If you miss your grandmother, you should have respected her memory then." "Stop, Baba," Ra'ed said firmly. "You are disrespecting her memory," he was shouting now, "and I don't even know why I came for this." "Walid," that was his wife. "I'm telling you all," he shouted in Arabic, "that I don't even know why I'm here. There is nothing for me at this wedding." Several people tried to calm him. His son Dimitri, his daughter Lemia. Then he heard Uncle Walid. That was his nephew Marcus, who barely talked to them anymore. "Let's take this somewhere else, Uncle." "Why are you always bossing people around?" he asked Marcus, who gave him a dry look like he wanted to pick him up and throw him. "This isn't the time," Marcus told him. "I guess we should be glad you're even here," Mr. Ammar shouted. "How lucky for us you decided to come." "I'll give you one warning," Marcus said. "Or what?" Mr. Ammar said. "One warning for what?" "Hey, come on," Dimitri said, trying to push them apart. "Come on, please. This is my brother's wedding." Ra'ed whispered something hurriedly to his fairy wife, who walked away with her father, clutching his arm as if she couldn't stand on her own skinny legs. She hurried to the front table and picked up her cat, hugging it like it would console her. Ra'ed took his arm and whispered angrily in Arabic, "Are you drunk?" "Yes," replied Mr. Ammar. "I am drunk. I am as drunk as Peter at the Last Supper." He yelled toward Ra'ed's father-in-law, "Peter, you hear, not Muhammad, Peter." Marcus rolled his eyes. "You're embarrassing everyone, Uncle." Mr. Ammar felt fury ripple through him. This beast dared to correct him after everything he'd done for them? "Oh, you want to open your mouth," he told Marcus. "You're just mad at us because we don't talk to your sister anymore. Isn't that right?" Marcus became very quiet. "Well, guess what? Nobody talks to her." Mr. Ammar had him now. What could his nephew say to that? Why would why would we? She's not welcome here. She's shacking up with her boyfriend," he shouted, getting close to Marcus. The punch hit him in the stomach, swift and fierce like a rifle butt. Later, his wife would say at least Marcus had spared him his face. People gasped, and Mr. Ammar struggled to breathe for a few seconds because of both the pain that bloomed in his belly and the fact that Marcus had knocked him flat on his ass. Ra'ed and Dimitri shouted at Marcus to get out, and from his view on the floor, Mr. Ammar watched Marcus's thick, wide back retreating, pushing through the stampede of people to the front of the hall. Some lifted him, others squawked nervously like chickens. "What happened? Why'd the big guy hit the groom's father? Should we call the police?" "No police, no police," he heard his wife say, imploring everyone. "Everything's okay." "We're okay, everybody," Ra'ed said. "Not a fight, just an accident. My father tripped." The muttering changed as people who had not really seen the punch began to absorb and repeat the news story. And that was it. Marcus, who was heading out the door, was no longer the aggressor. The story morphed quickly. He, Mr. Ammar, was a drunken fool who'd embarrassed himself at his son's wedding. "I'm leaving," he announced, standing up. "This is not right. This hasn't been right from the beginning." He walked out slowly, his hand pressed to his side. It hurt to inhale, but he raised his head high, his eyes meeting those of others directly until they looked away. Ra'ed did not follow him out. When he turned back to look, he saw Ra'ed at the front, looking angry and disappointed, his arm around his wife, consoling her while she consoled her fat cat. His wife and a few others did follow. "I'm fine," he told them dismissively, and eventually they wandered off. Alone, he trudged through the Sheraton's carpeted hallways until he found himself in an empty lounge room. He stood under a large chandelier assembled from thousands of glass beads, each one reflecting the light to look bigger and more important than it really was. The chandelier cascaded down into a cone, like a big light ready to beam him up to heaven. Maybe that wasn't where he'd end up, he thought, looking around at the ornate room, lined with tall vases of flowers, plush carpeting, rich sofas and chairs. He slumped onto one couch and stared up at that chandelier, which seemed to be pointed down, cocked, and aimed right at his heart. A few seconds later, the music. It had been there the whole time, but he had not quite heard it until now, in his stillness. The sound rippled softly like a canoon through the room. He looked around the lounge. He was alone, but he realized it was coming from a side room. Standing up, he lurched unsteadily toward what looked like a break room for employees. Inside, servers in black vests and pants stood listening reverently to a woman hugging a large harp as if it were a child. He did not recognize the song she was playing and humming, but it soothed him. And then she looked up, stared into his eyes, and he gasped loudly. "You," he said, holding out his hand. "Hello," she said, tilting her head to the side, just as she used to do before. "What a coincidence." "My God," he said, "I thought I would never see you again." "I do see patients' families sometimes," she said. "How lovely to reconnect." She stood up and took his hand, pressing it warmly between both of hers. He remembered that too, how she cradled his hand like a prayer. "We went through a lot together that week, didn't we?" she said. He remembered how warm her hands had felt rubbing his back, holding the beads of his rosary for him when he'd collapsed into sobs. They were not smooth hands, but supple, like broken, worn leather. They'd lifted his mother by the arms, these hands, held a stethoscope to her chest and then her back. They dipped a sponge into a shallow bucket to clean his mother's legs and feet, and they'd run a comb through his mother's long, uncut white hair. And in the end, in a final act of grace, these strong hands had pulled the sheet over his mother's contorted and twisted face. "The groom is my son," he said. "Ah," she said, "the bride is my niece. My husband's niece, technically. I promised her I'd play for her. It's an old family song." "Your husband? He's out there?" Mr. Ammar asked. "Yes," she said. "Did you meet him? He has a long beard." "The man wearing a skirt?" he said. She laughed softly. "Ah, yes, I always remember our conversation so fondly." She was indulging him, he could tell, the way his wife did. "It's called a kilt," she said. "I'm sure you've seen one before. Our family tartan is the design he's wearing." It's still a skirt, he wanted to say, but he kept the thought in his own mind. There suddenly didn't seem to be any pleasure in packing his opinions into a bullet and firing it into his listener. He believed so strongly right now that he would rather hurt himself than insult this woman. "Thank you for what you did," he said, "for my mother." "It was a blessing to know her," she said, "even for a few weeks. She was really lovely." He squeezed her hand again, his throat thick, but his mind clear. "Will you come and listen to me play?" she asked him. "Everyone in there," he shrugged, "nobody's happy with me." "Oh, I can't believe that," she said. "It's true," he said. "I'd love for you to hear the song, though." She patted his shoulder. "Won't you come and listen?" He did, sitting just inside the door at a vacant table as she fluttered her hands over the strings, pulling out a lovely echoing sound and complimenting it with her pretty voice. He'd walked in on her once singing to his mother, he remembered, the Ave Maria. He saw his wife, whose head was craned, looking around the room for him. She was always making sure he was safe. "I'm back here," he wanted to tell her. "I'm okay. I'm listening." Thank you very much.
Weddings are the best. Thank you. That was wonderful. Yeah, it's an important, I think, ethical exercise to write from the point of view of someone you dislike, and it's also fun to have them get punched. Our second reader this evening is our journalism professor, Jason Fagone. A few years back, long-form narrative journalism was getting harder and harder to find, not because readers didn't want it, but because it was expensive to produce. The San Francisco Chronicle decided to buck that trend. It created a post specifically for long-form journalism, advertised it nationwide, and Jason Fagone beat out 300 other professional journalists to get that job. His articles on technology, sports, and culture have appeared in The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Mother Jones, The New York Times Magazine, Wired, GQ, Esquire, among other places. One of those stories about an elderly couple who figured out how to game the Massachusetts State Lottery was made into a film called Jerry and Marge Go Large, starring Bryan Cranston and Annette Bening. which reminds me of the time Jason called me out of the blue around midnight one night, ostensibly to ask for my advice about which production company offer to accept, but in reality just to flex with the news that he'd been texting with Scarlett Johansson. Jason and I have known each other a really long time. We met on social media, and I'd let you guess which one, but it would take too long. It wasn't TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram or Twitter or Facebook. We met on MySpace about 20 years ago, just after we'd each published our first book, and that turned into a friendship that lasts to this day, which is another thing that I wish for you as writers, not just long-lasting friendships, but long-lasting writerly friendships with people who understand the particular challenges that writers face. In addition to his long-form journalism, Jason is the author of 3 books, the most recent of which is The Woman Who Smashed Codes, an NPR Book of the Year. I hope that reading it will lead you to chase down his earlier books, especially his first book, The Horseman of the Esophagus, which is, great title. It's an impossible object. It is a thoughtful, lyrical exploration of the world of competitive eating. Please help me welcome the Joey Chestnut of long-form journalism, Jason Fagone.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Very kind about this part about Scarlett Johansson. You make it seem like we were tight. if only. Hello.
Hi.
I'm going to read tonight from Horseman of the Esophagus, Competitive Eating, and the Big Fat American Dream. This is my first book. 20 years ago now. It's about professional competitive eaters, people who try to eat a lot of a certain kind of food in a very short amount of time, to win prizes, cash, whatever else. And I've been thinking about it lately because one of the characters in the book recently retired. And so I've been feeling very nostalgic and wistful, and thinking about this book and my time working on the book. So this guy retired after a legendary eating career. His name is Takeru Kobayashi. And he's not American, he's Japanese, but he competed a lot in America. I got to meet him, talk to him, and sort of admire him. I have here a partial list of some of his eating records, which include eating 150 rice balls in 30 minutes, that's 20 pounds of rice balls, 337 buffalo wings in 30 minutes, 41 lobster rolls in 10 minutes, 57 cow brains in 15 minutes, that's 17.7 pounds of cow brains, 93 hamburger sliders in 8 minutes, 159 tacos in 10 minutes, 62 pizza slices in 12 minutes. And my personal favorite record of Kobayashi's is something that I had to hunt down when I was reporting the book. I had to find this very obscure videotape of a game show that appeared in Japan very briefly called Food Battle Club. There was a segment on Food Battle Club called Weight Crash. And the name of the game in Weight Crash was that they would simply lead the competitive eaters to an all-you-can-eat buffet. They would weigh them beforehand, and then they would weigh them after 15 minutes. And the difference in weight, whoever had the highest difference in weight, won Weight Crash. And Kobayashi scored 25 pounds. And kept it down. Right. Exactly. So in honor of Kobayashi, I'm going to read 2 scenes from Horseman. The first doesn't include him, but it kind of sets the stage for him. And the second is a moment-by-moment description of his greatest achievement in eating, which I would venture is one of the greatest achievements in all of sports, not just in eating, but all of sports. So, okay, just to set this up briefly, a little bit about sort of like competitive eating history. There have been eating contests for hundreds of years in America, right? There would be a pie eating contest on the 4th of July at the turn of the century, and the mayor would compete, and it was just really a fun local thing, right? In the 1970s, there were these 2 old school PR men in New York who took over the Nathan's Famous hot dog account. Nathan's Famous Hot Dogs in Coney Island, their original location. And to jazz up business for Nathan's Famous, they created a hot dog eating contest on the 4th of July at the Coney Island location. And they would wear classic sort of straw voter hats of the carnival barker variety, and they would do that shtick. And so the competitors in the contest were people who just happened to be on Coney Island that day with their families, right? Like large guys from Queens or something. And it'd be like, step right up, sir. You know, how many hot dogs can you eat in 12 minutes? And so it was a very local thing. The numbers of hot dogs that were eaten were not very impressive. It was 8 hot dogs in 12 minutes, 10 hot dogs in 12 minutes. These are the kinds of very, very, very accessible numbers of hot dogs, right? And then in the 1990s, the Nathan's Famous account was taken over by a man. If you want to visualize him as Don Draper, please do, because he was very, very handsome, very slick, a very slick kind of professional PR guy. He had an English degree, and he loved to use it. And he also loved the carnival barker shtick. And he sort of modernized the hot dog contest. He brought it into the modern era, jazzed it up. He created a professional eating league around it called the International Federation of Competitive Eating. But eating was still a joke, right? It was still, nobody saw it as a legitimate sport, absolutely nobody. And the idea that it could be seen as a sport was the joke. Everybody was in on the joke. George Shea and all the eaters were in on the joke. And then Kobe came along and showed another way to look at competitive eating. So I just want to give you a sense of the joke, the mode of the joke. And I apologize in advance. I can't do a George Shea impression. I'm not an actor. I wish I could do it. I wish I could summon it, because he's really one of a... If you can imagine like a combination of Vince McMahon, Don Draper, but somebody who also had like what y'all have, which is like PhD in comparative literature or like an MFA in poetry, that's George Shea. But I'll do my best. Okay, so this is a scene of a grilled cheese eating contest, grilled cheese sandwich, and the sandwiches that were being eaten were completely normal grilled cheese sandwiches, but there was a special grilled cheese sandwich that was present at the contest as sort of like a display item, which was a grilled cheese sandwich on which the image of the Virgin Mary had appeared. So this is very blasphemous, so I apologize for anyone who's about it. She has picked a fine day to grace Southern California with her presence. The sun is shining, the sky is blue, gulls loop above the Venice Beach boardwalk in jazzy little arcs. The February air is warm, but not warm enough to melt the grilled cheese sandwich through which she has chosen to broadcast her message of peace. Anyway, she's packed inside a plastic box, surrounded by cotton balls, and encased in a frame for protection. 10 years ago, the image of the Virgin Mary appeared on a grilled cheese sandwich in the frying pan of Diana Dizer, a Florida jewelry designer, and now she is here. The Blessed Virgin in recent years has been appearing less and less in crop formations and curvy building glass. She seems to prefer as holy vehicles specific kinds of food. She has not seared herself onto a piece of ahi sushi or a crepe Suzette. She has not arranged her visage in mosaic form using the grains of a delicate risotto. Instead, she has chosen as vehicles to become flesh a popcorn kernel, a Funyun, and a rolled gold honey mustard pretzel twist. And here now, a grilled cheese sandwich. This afternoon, when it comes to appetite, the old girl is flat outclassed, because in 15 minutes here at Venice Beach, the World Grilled Cheese Eating Championship will be decided. It's an eating contest. Whoever eats the most grilled cheese sandwiches in 10 minutes wins $3,500. The prize pot has attracted some of the hungriest people in the world. People who eat under the banner of the International Federation of Competitive Eating, also known as the IFOC or Federation. They consider themselves professionals and athletes. Guys like Eric Badlands Booker, a 420-pound subway conductor, rapper, and world champion in the donut, corned beef, hash, and cheesecake disciplines. Hungry Charles Hardy, who just half an hour ago tattooed the initial IFOCE onto his right bicep. Ed Cookie Jarvis, a Long Island realtor who embroiders his numerous eating titles onto a gargantuan flowing robe with his portrait airbrushed on the front, flanked by a lightning bolt. And of course, Sonia Thomas, America's greatest eater at the moment. Her ponytail held in place by 2 star-shaped barrettes, 5'5", 103 pounds. Her eating titles are so numerous that promoters list them alphabetically. Asparagus, baked beans, chicken nuggets, chicken wings, eggs, fruitcake, giant burger, hamburger, jambalaya, Maine lobster, meatballs, oysters, pulled pork, quesadilla, sweet potato casserole, tacos, toasted ravioli, turducken. I did that in one breath. I practiced that and I nailed it. Brothers and sisters, Contest is starting, the voice is mic'd up. There are moments in our days when we are suddenly lost. Conversation stopped. 150 curious heads swiveled toward the man on stage in the dark blazer and the straw voter hat. This is the contest MC George Shea, chairman of the IFOCE, which built itself as the governing body of all stomach-centric sport. His hands clasped together over his crotch hold a microphone. He looks down and widens his stance dramatically as the opening lament of Moby's Natural Blues emerges from the PA system. We hum along, doing the million things that Americans do, and then suddenly we are struck. A woman, excited, screams. And we wonder why. There is no trigger. There is no reason. And yet there it is. Sadness, isolation, loss. Why? Shea pauses and then answers his question. Because the pursuits of our lives have obscured our lives, ladies and gentlemen. It is not only the hustle and bustle, the cars and the kids and the debts and the acquisitions. It is something more. Often Shea refers to competitive eating as the country's fastest growing sport. And he likes to say that eating is now number 5 in America's heart after baseball, basketball, football, and golf, having surpassed hockey and badminton. Today's contest is just one of 100 scheduled for 2005. We cannot see, Shea is saying. We cannot hear. We cannot think. And that is why she has come, amid no fanfare whatsoever, a woman grilling a cheese sandwich. The music shifts to a gentle adult contemporary track, and Shea bleeds all aggression from his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, it is said that pearls are the precipitate of sunlight, slowed and bent by the ocean, until it forms a nugget of beauty inside the lowly mollusk. And likewise, this grilled cheese sandwich is the precipitate of the divine spirit, captured here on earth, in the most unlikely of places, delivered to us in the image of the Virgin Mary. Okay, so you get the joke, right? The joke is that nobody could ever possibly see this ridiculous thing as a sport. Right? Then something happened. Kobayashi. I'm just going to set this up for a second. Kobayashi he didn't look like the traditional eater. He didn't look like a large American white dude, which was the typical eater at the time. He looked like a gym rat. He was about 130 pounds, 140 pounds, spiky hair, very slender. He was the kind of guy who did like Pilates. So he was very surprising. And he was the first to really sort of take competitive eating seriously as a sport and to train for it. And in 2001, in the space of 12 minutes, he made it possible for the first time to actually take seriously the idea that competitive eating might be an athletically impressive event. But he had to show people. So I'm just going to read you what happened in that moment. This is a scene from the 2001 Nathan's famous hot dog contest on Coney Island. And there's in competitive eating, there's kind of like a before this era and there's an after this era. And this is the moment where everything changed. To set this up, okay, so I need to explain to you a little bit about like how the contest functions. So just visualize like a long table. Visualize like 12 large American dudes. And then 2 much tinier Japanese dudes. The first Japanese competitor that year, 2001, was a guy named the Rabbit, Kazutoyo Arai. He was well known to all of the American eaters because he was the defending champion at Nathan's. So he had eaten the previous year 25 hot dogs and buns in 12 minutes, which everybody thought was an absolutely amazing number. And so everybody knew who he was. And then the second Japanese competitor that year was a young Takara Kobayashi, aged 23. But absolutely nobody knew who Kobayashi was. He looked like a kid. Everybody assumed he was the Rabbit's son. He had never competed in America before. He didn't speak any English. And all anybody had ever heard about him was some rumor that he had broken some crazy record in Japan, and that his nickname there was the Prince. And that's all they knew about him. Nobody knew anything else about this kid. Even George Shea, the guy who was running the contest, had no idea who he was. But there was a camera crew from Japanese TV that was filming, which should have been a tip-off that something crazy was about to happen, but nobody picked up on it. Okay, the last thing you need to know before I read this is that is how the score is kept at the hot dog contest. So the audience can keep track of how many hot dogs each competitor has eaten. There's a woman named a Bonette who stands behind each competitor with like a flip card, like in a deli. So if you picture, there's like a flip card, like 1, 2, 3, and the numbers flip each time they eat a hot dog. The person who decides that a hot dog has been eaten correctly, fully with the dog in the bun, is a judge who's sitting below the table and watching the eaters. Then the judge will signal to the Bonette, like, hey, that's one, and then the Bonette will flip the card, right? And so the Bonnettes, the numbers in the Bonnettes flip cards went up to 25. Because I cannot emphasize to you enough that, like, at this moment, everybody thought that 25 hot dogs and buns in 12 minutes was the absolute limit of human capability. It's like you know how like the human, like biology and physics and the human body, like can run a mile in about 4 minutes. Maybe on a crazy day somebody could run like a 3:48 mile or a 3:52 mile, but it's just biology and physics. Maybe on the rarest of days somebody could eat 26 hot dogs in 12 minutes or 27 hot dogs, but certainly no more than that. Okay. So let me read what happened. All right, at noon, George Shea kicked off the show by introducing the eaters one by one. Hungry Charles Hardy pumped his fist. Ed Cookie Jarvis draped himself with the American flag as the previous American winner. An eater from Middletown, Ohio, named David Kundago Karma ripped his shirt and glared at the audience with a mean grin. Then came the Japanese, Kobayashi first, giving Kundaga a high five as he walked on stage. He wore a white headband that said TV Tokyo and made his ears stick out. The rabbit came out last as the reigning champ and foisted the mustard yellow belt high above his head. So the winner of the previous year's contest gets like a boxing style belt that's yellow, the mustard yellow belt. In the seconds before the countdown, the rabbit closed his eyes as if he were meditating. Kobayashi arranged his 5 large yellow cups of water. They get 5 cups of water and 5 dogs to start out. The crowd chanted something indecipherable. The rabbit slapped both of his cheeks hard as IFOCD officials brought each eater 2 paper plates of 5 hot dogs each. Shea counted down from 10 to 1, and the DJ cued Disco Inferno, and with that, kicked off what was supposed to be the most boring 8-minute stretch of the day, because in a 12-minute eating contest, hot dog eating contest, nothing interesting usually happens until the final minutes. That's when you start getting totals and you get a sense of who the front runners are. It's the last few minutes that usually determine the outcome in the entire previous history of the hot dog contest. Except this time, after only 3 minutes into the contest, the little Japanese kid with the jutting ears and cute spiky hair had almost broken the world record of 25 in 3 minutes, and he still had 9 minutes left to go. Okay. So in this part of the book, I tracked down a VHS tape of somebody who was in the audience, which was very hard to find, and then so I like moment by moment try to reconstruct the miracle. So I'm gonna read this and then that'll be it. Okay, so one of the first competitors to realize that something unusual was happening was Don Moses Lerman, the veteran matzo ball champ. All of a sudden, Don recalls, I've got 8 hot dogs and the Japanese guy has got 15. And when you hear that, you say to yourself in your mind, should I put my body through this trauma, if I can't catch him? Lerman, calling upon his years of experience, was able to focus and continue eating, but most of the other eaters weren't so cool-headed. Perhaps the next American eater to notice that something weird was happening was Steve the Appetite Addicts, a locomotive mechanic from Baltimore. Addicts was stationed directly to Kobe's left. In photos from that day, Addicts was pictured with his mouth open, spilling half-chewed dog meat, head cranked toward Kobayashi with a look of pure confusion. Kobe was eating his hot dogs with an inhuman ease, while the rabbit kept the dog and bun together as an intact unit, dunking the whole thing and stuffing it. Kobe was separating the dog from the bun. What's more, he was breaking each dog in half, then eating both halves at the same time, after which he dunked and ate the buns separately. Kobayashi's judge was Gersh Kuntzman, a New York Post scribe and the original competitive eating beat reporter. He'd always covered it as a joke every year. He won his joke. Gersh and other reporters would later dub Kobayashi's eating style the Solomon method. Okay. I was in awe, said Steve Addix. It was amazing. I was standing next to something that's like almost like a religious experience. Something that I was so close to see that very few people will ever be able to witness like that. As far as the magnitude of what it meant to me as an eater, it was just like I'm sitting there watching a miracle. It didn't take long for recognition to filter down the table in both directions, sped by the increasingly panicked statements of head judge Mike DeVito, who kept looking imploringly at Judge Gersh-Kunstman, who was squatting in front of the table with a pack of numbers printed on yellow sheets of paper. His numbers went to 30. The Bunnett's flippable cards only went to 25. The yellow sheets were just in case somebody got close to 30. When Gersh was handed the pack of numbers that went up to 30 earlier that day, he thought it was a joke. He'd never need that many. Now, as DeVito looked at Gersh for verification, was this really happening? Gersh gave him the thumbs up and worried that he would run out of numbers. After 3 minutes and 24 seconds, Kobayashi had finished his 22nd hot dog. "Oh my God, ladies and gentlemen," George Shea said, 22 hot dogs and buns. Some perspective on this achievement of 22 was still pretty great. The key benchmark of greatness in competitive eating, akin to rolling a 300 game in bowling or scoring under par in golf, is to eat 20 hot dogs in 12 minutes. This is called doing the deuce. By the time an eater has done the deuce, he has consumed 4.4 pounds of solid food and perhaps 2 pounds of water. He's eaten 6,180 calories, 403 grams of fat, and almost 14 grams of sodium. By the time an eater has done the deuce, he is ready to lie down someplace air-conditioned close to a toilet. But Kobayashi, already at 22 hot dogs, wasn't lagging. The rabbit was in a distant second with 14, and the rest of the eaters were in single digits. "We need more hot dogs over here." "Ladies and gentlemen," said Shea, "Kobayashi has broken the American record." On the right end of the table, Kundago Karma was well on his way to 20 hot dogs. He thought he was doing great. He thought all the cheering was for him. Then his counter told him the little Japanese kid just finished 27. "No fucking way," said Kundog. "Way," said the counter. Kundog looked out into the audience and found Adam, his young son. Adam was waving his hands wildly, gesturing for Kundog to hurry up. His eyes were wide. Kundog finally looked over at Kobayashi and saw what was happening, watched him for a few seconds, instantly threw one of his hot dogs into the crowd and put down his buns. So did Steve, the appetite addicts. A third eater, gentleman Joe Manchetti, took off his shirt and executed what he would later call a combination throwing in the towel and waving the white flag, exposing his ample belly. Someone in the crowd yelled for him to put his shirt back on. The Japanese TV host started losing it, started screaming, "Kobayashi! Kobayashi! 29 hot dogs! 29 hot dogs and buns!" And on the face of George Shea, this man who could quote Virgil in the original Latin and often worked Shakespeare references into his monologues, which had become through long practice these great loquacious jets of ballyhoo that he could spray into audiences for 20 minutes at a time without breaking a sweat or dangling a participle. Yes, in the face of George Shea, a public man, a carnival barker, as cynical and wised up as they come, you could see that the muscles had gone slack. Shea looked at Kobayashi, opened his mouth, and faintly shook his head. The man who had invented the modern sport of competitive eating had just witnessed its remaking. George Shea, for maybe 2 seconds, was speechless. He turned away from Kobayashi and looked in the crowd. "One away," he said, "one away from the magic number of 30. The Bunnett, having run out of flippable cards at 25, held up a yellow sheet that said 30. There was a roar. In the judges' pit, Gersh-Kunstman ran out of numbers. He started furiously writing Kobayashi's hot dog totals on the backs of yellow sheets with a ballpoint pen. 34, 36. The crowd chanted, 40, 40, 40. 47 hot dogs and buns in 12 minutes. Kobayashi! 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 Ladies and gentlemen, count down with me if you will. 10, 9, 8, 7, Kobayashi! 5, 4, 3, Kobayashi! 1. And on the back of a yellow piece of paper held high above the head of the victorious Kobayashi was a sharpied number representing his final total of 50. 50. 50 hot dogs and buns. Yosha, yelled Kobe. All right. The DJ played an upbeat song as Shea announced the winners. In third place was Hungry Charles Hardy, who as the top American was draped with the stars and stripes previously worn by Ed Cookie Jarvis. Hardy immediately bent over the table in pain. The flag did nothing to disguise his obvious discomfort. In second place, the Rabbit with 31 hot dogs and buns, 6 more than his prior world record, and on any other day an astounding total. But it was Kobe who now held aloft the giant gold trophy and the mustard yellow belt. He grinned and grinned. He appeared energetic, bouncy, as though he could run a marathon. His countrymen surrounded him, congratulating him in Japanese. "You're a beast," said the Rabbit. "Aren't you happy?" asked the Japanese TV host. "Oh," said Kobe, "I'm happy. You had 50. But how do you feel?" "I can keep going." All right, there's 2 more paragraphs. An American reporter stuck a microphone in Kundog's face and asked him for comment. Kundog shook his head and muttered, "Coney Harbor." Meanwhile, Gersh Kunstman rushed to the phone to call in the results to the New York Post city desk. Before placing the call, Gersh brainstormed analogies that might impress the Post editors and get him space. The Post editors lacked a nuanced appreciation of the gluttonous arts. Kobayashi eating 50 hot dogs, Gersh reasoned, was maybe like Secretariat winning the Belmont by 31 lengths, or the Jets winning the Super Bowl in 1969, or a rookie shortstop breaking Bond's home run record by 100 dingers. Gersh Kunstman dialed his editor, demanded space on the front page. Kobe's victory, he argued, was not only a watershed moment in competitive eating, it was a singular achievement in all of sports history. The Post desk put him on hold.
I don't know if any of us counted on hearing the phrase legendary eating career, but we just did. Thank you so much to both of you, Susan and Jason, for those beautiful readings. Can we get another round of applause, please? As it was last night, their books are currently for sale in the Mural Room, and the authors will be available to sign your books. The world record for signing books is 50 in 12 minutes. We also have a table set up with some Lit House swag that you've probably seen if you want to round things out. A final note, the broadside postcards that you participated in the printing of, if there's anyone who didn't get one, there's a small stack of them on the small table next to the door going out to the porch if you want to grab one. Don't wander off because board game night fires up in 15 minutes or so. Thank you. Good night.